over to you, James.
Fantastic, and welcome everyone that's just joined. So this one is over in the Eastern Moors, so the Western Highlands. It's an area that I don't think many people tour in. If you can see the cursor here, you start in the Greymare's Tail Waterfall car park, and you follow this red dotted line all the way up and out, all the way up here to 1,062 meters out to Bin and Moor. About 5-hour hike if you don't take too many breaks to there, and that's when you see this view right here. Absolutely gorgeous. And you're at 1130, 1,130 meters, and you're going down to about 200 meters. It's just phenomenal. I think it might be the best ride of my life. Just perfect snow, that sort of almost like it's moon, like the wind blowing these sort of mini craters over the top, slight crust layer, and it's just snow as far as the eye could see. It was absolutely gorgeous. If this could be my Groundhog Day, I would be a very happy person.
James, when was that?
That would be mid-February 2021, I think. And this was sort of exploratory mission number 4 or 5 in that area. So it took quite a bit of scouting. If you see my cursor there, I'd already scouted that one and gone down just out of sight there, and a couple of other ones around the corner. And I'd already come out here, but forgotten about this area here where you have to hike back up. So I got all the way out to here, went to hike, and I realized at this point, if I went to hike out, I might have got avalanched into the terrain trap. So got to here, saw this view, and turned back on the first attempt. Came back a week later and did it, and it was very much worth it.
Nice.
So, all righty. I think you hear us both saying, look, if you've got a question, just pipe up and we'll stop as and when. Did somebody just say something there?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I'm completely new to splitboarding. How the brakes work on it?
So there aren't any brakes on splitboard bindings. It's a very, very good question though, and it relates a little bit to what James was saying. You have to be really conscious of your gear at the changeover time. And I try and make a big effort to find a suitable location to do the changeover. So you're always in danger of losing either a ski or a binding, or especially in Scotland because it's windy often.
Yeah.
So I dig myself a little ledge, if possible. If it's icy, then I desperately try and find somewhere that's flat enough. Always put things on top of my skis, my half snowboards if it's windy when I'm putting the binding on the other one. Just have to be really conscious of that. You can get leashes, but to be honest, you need to take them off to put everything together, so it becomes a bit counterproductive.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Awesome. So we have already covered this a wee bit, but part of this comes from personal experience. So the splitboarding skins you see in the left there, I got used off eBay, and the glue had gone on the skins and the bases were unwaxed. And what it meant was when I actually went to use it in real life, the glue had come off the skins, gone onto the base, and the snowboard would not ride. And so you find that out in practice. Very hard to just, you can see if the skins fit and all that kind of stuff. The other thing I found was that the skins, I think, had been stored near a radiator or something. So you can almost see in the photo, one is stretched further down the board. And I literally did so much splitboarding, I got splitboarder's elbow from tensioning the skin onto the board. And so it's definitely worth checking everything works once you get it. Otherwise, you end up in the middle of nowhere, just so frustrated it's unreal.
I didn't know that was a thing, splitboarder's elbow.
I found out that, I'm sure ski tours can get as well, but if one of your skins like dries up and shrivels too tight, yeah, you're like literally, I don't know, just bursting a gut trying to get the darn thing to go on. Go on, clip.
It's a good tip that somebody actually gave me is to carry, you get rub-on skin wax, and it also puts a little bit of waterproofing on your skin. So if you have older skins and you're trying to make them last as long as possible, which is a good thing to do, you know, there's no point to get new ones if your old ones can be repaired, then a little bit of rub-on skin care, literally, can really help make the difference. Keeping the glue on your skins dry, so trying not to get snow all over the gluey side of your skins when you're on the mountain, is a good thing to put effort into. It's really windy, that's really difficult. Generally speaking, the wind and the ice in Scotland are the things you need to think about. You need to have strategies for when it comes to splitboarding and keeping your skins dry. So doing one skin at a time. I cut my cheat sheet in half so that I can do one skin at a time. I take half of one skin, put the cheat sheet on, and then fold it onto the rest of the one half of the skin, put that away in my bag before I tackle ski number 2. If I was in the Alps, I might not do that. I could do both at the same time effectively. But yeah, just those little tips and tricks.
Yeah, totally agree with you, Leslie. You know, things like you have poles because you're touring, so put them in the way of your backpack so it doesn't roll down the hill while you're switching over, transitioning. Is helpful. And you can see in the photo there, I flipped the skis or whatever you want to call them up on their bindings, so they don't slide away, they don't get buffeted by the wind so much, they're going to stay put. And I've sat them both together like that and had lunch sat on top of them as well to keep my bum warm and dry.
A little toothbrush or a little, you get a special splitboard brush just to brush the snow from where you attach your bindings to your snowboard is a really handy thing to carry as well.
And I've used the multi-tool to just chisel out a wee bit of ice that occasionally forms in the little nooks and crannies of the, you know, the various clips that the splitboard has to lock together.
Do you get your poles icing up often?
Yeah, I don't get the rime so much on the West Coast, probably more East Coast, but I know what you mean.
So a tip there would be to take your poles inside, especially if they're telescopic, overnight, and extend them fully so that they dry out, because if they have water in them when you go splitboarding, sometimes they get frozen in the shortened position, which doesn't help. It'll be very annoying.
Equally the super long position as well, where you're like, what am I going to do with this? Yeah, so I think Leslie already touched on this, but I've definitely found the same. I have progressively opened up my stance, so my default stance in resort is +18 front foot, -12 back foot. And then what I've done is nudge them forward 3 degrees, tried that out, nudge them both forward 3 degrees and tried that out, and just kept sort of migrating it to see if there's a point at which I need to turn back. From my experience, at least with the Karakoram bindings I've got right now, that's very faffy. So I would definitely want to do that at home, in the garage, whatever, not out and about. And that's a before you get out there stance adjustment.
The other thing that's worth thinking about is the bag that you take with you. So James has got it here on the slide. You'll need a backpack to take your kit, and you're going to have a far easier day if you have a backpack that's designed to carry touring gear. Most backpacks that are made for touring will carry either a snowboard or carry both snowboard or skis. But work out the most comfortable way for you to attach your equipment to your bag, make sure everything fits. I'm renowned for having far too much in my backpack. I like to have everything and more that I would ever need, but make sure you have a bag that you can fit everything you need in. and that will make your life easier.
Totally. And one of the challenges I found is a snowboard cut in half is really pointy at the ends. And if that catches you in the calf while you're hiking up or down, oh, that's so painful. And then inevitably, like anything in life, you do it once, you do it again, and it's worst on the downhill. And just getting repeatedly stabbed in the back calf, it's just it's not pleasant. So unless it's quite a narrow track, so if you ever go to Lost Valley and Bidgeon, it can be quite a narrow track there. So you may want it in snowboard mode on your back, but often I prefer it almost sort of TP side. So as you see in the photo there, attach the sides of the backpack with a sort of rubber strap along the top, so it makes a sort of triangle. So then I'm not getting clattered on my legs by the board itself. Okie dokie. So preparation, number 3 of 3. You are going to be accessing, Scottish backcountry terrain, maybe beyond if you get the chance. Certainly Tahoe is epic for its backcountry, but we're talking about the Scottish part of things. And thankfully people have been there before, and there are several books you can buy, not the least of which is Kenny Biggins has, I think it's at least 3 books. There's one in Glencoe, there's one in Nevis, and I think, is there a Cairngorm one as well, Leslie?
Yeah, there is.
And
Many- Oh, sorry, James. Many of the winter walking books are also very useful for looking at splitboard routes, although not touring specific. It's good information.
Any particular ones that you would recommend, or what have you?
Oh, I've got so many. What I like to do is go to the old secondhand bookshops and look for the old classics, and then you'll get some ideas of how to link tours together. There are some really good old books about winter walking in Scotland, so yeah, just have a dig around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and thankfully the upside of social media is quite often you can see photos of what the conditions are like yesterday, day before, whatever, and the Scottish Avalanche Information Service can provide info on what's likely going on with that terrain at that particular time, and you can pick terrain that's likely to be A, easy to go up, and B, worthwhile going down.
It's worth having a little try of your equipment in terrain that you know well. So somewhere maybe off-piste that you've been before, that you've ridden before, next to the resort or just out of bounds, and taking that on as if you were going touring. And that will give you a really good idea about how you would walk up something, what's too steep to go straight up when you need to cross the slope diagonally, so that you're not trying to walk up something too steep in a place that you know well. And that will give you a really good feel for where your comfort zone is. And then if there's good snow, so right now it's just look out the window, it was snowing quite heavily in Aviemore earlier, and I'm hoping that it will snow enough to go back to this place. So this is Millebuchel, just at the back of Loch Morlich. It goes up to about 640, so it's not high, but there is great terrain. It was a lot of fun to ride there when the snow was good, and sometimes you can be lucky and access a lower down area like Millebuchel, and you access it through touring. So if you have the gear, be ready for when the snow comes. Maybe go walking there. I'm always walking about the hills, mountain biking about the hills in the summer, checking out routes. So it's definitely something I have in mind. If I'm out hill walking, I'll be paying attention to where I'd like to go snowboarding in the winter more than I'll be paying attention to much else, to be honest. So yeah, plan ahead. If there's terrain you already know and it's got snow on it, all the better. You'll feel more comfortable in that area.
Yeah, and I know it sounds obvious, but quite often you'll end up out most of the day, all day, whatever, and bringing enough things that you're going to come back happy. You know, bring lunch, for example, bring something to drink. I've been out and about and all the rivers have been frozen. So you can't, you know, you're going to need to bring some water or similar to keep you going. And emergency gear. We're going to cover emergency gear in a little bit more detail later on. But, you know, relatively inexpensive things like an emergency blanket and so forth hardly weigh anything, and you can chuck it in your bag. It doesn't require any specialist knowledge to use, on top of the standard transceiver, shovel, probe, and the knowledge of how to use them. Maybe just to briefly touch on planning the route in. So if you take, for example, Splitboarding and Locking, pretty much whatever way you go, it's a bit of a hefty hike in, but certainly the northern ridge is the path of least resistance. Going straight up Broad Gully, it can be quite icy in the morning, but softens up later on just because the aspect of the north facing aspect of the bowl. And the eastern ridge requires a little bit of almost rock climbing at one point, which can be awkward with a snowboard on and heavy backpack on your back. So local knowledge, going with somebody that's been there before, looking at the map beforehand, can make your life much easier, much harder, depending on which route you take up.
And you know, for me, I think just to add that you don't have to go on a big long tour to make it worthwhile taking your touring gear. You can do one run and that'll take you somewhere special that maybe not so many people or nobody has been that day, just to drop off of the back of whatever ski resort you're in and be able to walk back up. It might just be a 45-minute mini mission, but if you've got the gear and you know how to use it, then it definitely makes your day a whole lot better. It gives you more options.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So the approach. So we will talk about this in a bit of more detail later on. But as we mentioned previously, you are going to be walking in the mountains. A lot of people think about the ride down being the time that they might get avalanched, but equally, if you're walking up the slope you're about to ride down, you know, there's the potential for it to happen then. And for you to either rescue others or be rescued, you need to have the equipment that allows that to be possible. So a transmitter and receiver both can either transmit or receive a signal, and you can home in on somebody who has been avalanched, or somebody can hone in on you and then dig you out. And then the probe is just for a local area. If you think you've pretty much got them, to pinpoint them when you're there. And there are a number of places that will sell that equipment, and usually manufacturers have some pretty good training videos on their website, and they often post them on social media as well as formal courses that provide you a sort of avalanche certification on various levels of training there. And then thankfully Snow Sport Scotland over the last few years has been building its training library, so there's various videos, some fantastic resources there that you can watch, recorded sessions like what we're doing tonight, where you can go through some very specific training in particular areas in the backcountry outside of Splitboarding specific stuff. Weather-wise, you can do a generic forecast from the BBC or what have you. The Met Office does give you the option to type in the name of a mountain summit and get a forecast specific to it, which is very helpful if you are trying to determine, okay, is it realistic for me to summit this mountain? Okay, it's 40-mile-an-hour breeze with 50 to 60-mile-an-hour gusts. Maybe it's not realistic.
I think it's really useful to always check the weather forecast, even if you're just going resort skiing, so that you get to know where your tolerance level is. So I can quite safely say after 38, if the wind's blowing more than 38, then I'm not going to have a good time. Quite often I still go knowing that I'm going to need, you know, my balaclava on and whatnot, but I know what to expect then, because I'm used to being able to look at the forecast, and I've done that and imagined what it's going to be like, then experienced it, and then I can put all that experience together and get a picture of what's likely to happen. So you build up your experience and your skill at matching the forecast to the actual weather in the location you're going to as you go. So if you're not already looking at weather forecasts and trying to do that, it's worth just doing it, no matter if you're going touring or resort skiing.
Totally. And, you know, thankfully we do have some pretty up-to-date information as the winter rolls in from the Scottish Avalanche Information Service. They do a really good regular write-up of a number of areas, and associated with that, some areas that are on a sliding scale of likelihood of avalanche, basically essentially avoid certain areas, certain elevations. But certainly the point of it all is that you are making an informed decision about your travel out there and back again. And so, for example, when I was at the top of Bin and Moor, I knew the aspects that were avalanche prone. And while I hadn't thought about the route all the way out and all the way back again, and so I had to turn back on myself at least once, I knew facing out over the call or whatever that I would have to go out that was avalanche prone. And because I was already aware of that information, I decided to turn back and didn't get myself into avalanche terrain. But if I didn't know that information and just went for it, perhaps I wouldn't actually be here right now. Who knows?
I think the avalanche awareness and avalanche avoidance, the avalanche avoidance is really the one that you want to home in on. To avoid avalanches, of course, you need to be aware of where they might happen and what might cause them. But really, when you're going out of bounds, you are aiming to avoid them at all costs, because they're certainly no fun and not to be messed with. I can think of, people always ask me, have you ever been in avalanche terrain, or have you been avalanched? And I'm, going back 25, 30 years, there wasn't nearly the amount of information available that there is now. And it wasn't the normal thing to wake up in the morning and you didn't have a smartphone, for example, and you had CFAX, or the equivalent of, if you were in Europe or North America, to check the avalanche report. And the avalanche report maybe happened every couple of days. If you were lucky, you had a line into the ski patrol. So over time, that information and information sharing and interpretation of the information has really come a long, long way. The first few seasons I did abroad, I just shudder to think. I was lucky, basically, and a lot of people are lucky. Avalanches, in the grand scheme of things, are not that common, but the consequences are huge. So you don't want to rely on being lucky. Avoidance is definitely key. I only realized that, however, when I went on my first courses, which is where I was getting to with the point. I really, really recommend that everybody, if they want to get into touring more, takes themselves on a course. And you can start just with the online education. There's loads of great resources here. We're going to share these links later. But just keep learning. I'm always learning. I'm always learning more about avalanche terrain and avalanche science. It's a fascinating world.
Yeah, and there's apps on your phone, so we will signpost this in a little bit more detail later on. So as well as the Think Winter and Snow Smart, which we'll share the specific links to towards the end of the session. So yeah, getting there. Some of it is obvious. If you're going to need to spend 5 hours getting to a summit, you're going to need to leave yourself 5 hours of daylight at the very least. But it's also leaving some room for things to maybe not quite go according to plan. Maybe the conditions aren't quite as good as you would like, so it'll take longer. And I've certainly left the car park in the dark with a head torch to give myself that wiggle room later on in the day. So I'm avoiding it, if I can, heading back down with a head torch. And that just means that you're aiming to do your split boarding in the light wherever possible.
I've got a question, James. Your first long tours, had you done many shorter tours before that? So tours that you knew were only going to take a few hours?
Yeah, so my first one out in Tahoe was probably about 3 hours all in. And we went from, it's Tahoe, so you just park up at the side of the road and skin from the side of the road. luxury. And we did one where we took the resort lift infrastructure to the summit and then toured from the resort infrastructure out from there to we had what you might call a sort of handrail feature, so a main road, and we'd already parked a car at that point. So we went from the resort itself, safety of the resort, used the lift infrastructure to gain the altitude, and then rode down to the car with transitioning through the sort of flat sections into split mode. Yeah.
Why I ask is because I think it's a good idea to really take some options that are easy to start off with. There's nothing worse. It's really stressful if you find yourself a long way away from where you want to be and you're running out of time and running out of light. That becomes something that will potentially ruin your day. So just go easy for the first few tours if you've not done it before. If you've got a lot of hill walking skills, then you can use them to really help you plan where you want to go and get an idea of how far you're going to go. And then just, I think the Be Avalanche Aware app, which we'll signpost to later, it's got a really helpful way of thinking about decisions. So it's the weather forecast, the people and yourself, and the terrain. I actually would start with the people and yourself when I'm thinking about going split boarding. So how am I feeling today? How much energy have I got? Because if I make a wrong decision at that point and agree to go on a 6-hour, 8-hour tour, and I know I've not got the energy in the tank to do that, nothing is going to go well. It's not going to be fun. So always start with how you're feeling, how much energy have you got, what kind of shape are you in, have you got a wee injury, have you got a niggle, have you got 2 hours in you, have you got 8 hours in you, and then go to the weather, because even if the weather's perfect, if you don't have it in you, then you're not going to make a good decision, I would say. Be Avalanche Aware app, though, explains that decision-making process well. And that's before you even get to the mountains and the snow.
Totally agree with you, Leslie. My second split boarding experience, we didn't realize it, but about an hour into the session, we found out that one of the people had been out like an absolute bender the night before and was absolutely hanging. And we as a group needed to decide if we were going forward or not, with that sort of liability into the mix. And it ended up being a very long day where we needed to babysit them for the entire day. So definitely the people part of it is a big deal.
There's a great film. We haven't linked to this, but you can Google it. I think it's called the Cherry Creek Avalanche. It's in the Pacific Northwest, I do believe, and it unpacks the decision making of two different groups who crossed paths on a day touring, and one group was avalanched and the other group had to come and help rescue them. But it's worth watching in terms of what's called heuristics of decision making in avalanche terrain. In layman's language, that is, really know who you're going touring with well, and make sure you allow everyone to speak up. Because if somebody's not feeling well or up for it and you don't know, then it could put everybody at risk.
So Leslie already talked about choosing what I would call transition moments. So you're taking your snowboard apart into skis or taking it from skis back into snowboard. And perhaps if you've never done it before, it seems like the summit of the mountain's the place to do it. But as Leslie mentioned, it might be 35 mile an hour, in which case your skins, as soon as you take them off your board, are probably going to stick to your forehead or something. Try and strangle you like an octopus. So picking a divot in the terrain that's down from the summit, that's on the leeward side, can help big time. And I've had a buddy transition too late, got a bunch of ice crystals between the glue on his skins, and then when he went to put them back on again, they would not stick to the snowboard. And so he opted to hike out on foot and was just up to his waist with every step, and it added another 2 hours to the day. So that can be really, really important. If you ever make it out to Bidjin, or however you pronounce that, you have the opportunity to spot your line on the way up. You can look for, you're going to be hiking up very similar snow conditions to what you'd be riding down. And that can be very helpful. Not always possible to spot your line on the way up, but having a bit of a plan for the way down is definitely a good way to go about doing it, rather than making it up as you ride. Similarly, on the way up, you're going to need to do at least basic navigation. Using way markers can be helpful. The start of a forest, a significant rocky outcrop, waterfall, whatever it might be, and ideally have the map of the area you're going to be in, and a compass, so you can, if it clags in, which it can do, at least have a method, a backup method of getting yourself out of that situation without going off the side of something.
I would also recommend practicing with your map and compass in resort. So certainly when I was doing my qualifications for guiding, I rode about for a number of years with a map and a compass, and bought lots of different maps from all over the world, and just really got used to matching the terrain, the actual physical terrain, to what it looked like on the different maps. And obviously different countries have different map scales, so that if I'm now going somewhere new that I've never been before, I can feel the map, if you like. I really can understand what the terrain is going to feel like, as well as what it might look like. And I think that's important, because you want to keep within your limits. If you're going far afield, certainly, or even just somewhere new, you don't want to plan to go somewhere that you already know might not be comfortable for you to go. You can find an easier way or a more mellow way down. So it's really worth getting good at reading your map and knowing how it's going to be in terms of riding. And if you're used to if you're good at navigation and you're used to reading maps in the summer, then use that skill to translate into what that's going to feel like if you're snowboarding down it or walking up on your snowboard.
Scotland, certainly my experience is sometimes I feel like I'm changing modes every 5 minutes, and I'm like skinning for a bit, and then it's on my backpack for a bit, and then maybe I've gone over a hill, so I might as well ride down it on snowboard mode, and then I put it back into ski mode. And far more than, say, out in Tahoe, which is where this photo was taken, where you skin for a bit, ride for a bit, skin for a bit, ride for a bit. There's a constant changing of modes.
How are you on skiing with your skins on your Splitboard?
So my first set of bindings was Karakoram something or others, and they had the option to lock the heel down.
Okay.
And that made it doable. And I'm an all right skier. I've done a lot of skiing, but they are borderline impossible to ski in, I find, for more than just a tiny little incline.
Certainly, I mean, I'm lucky. I have also done a lot of skiing, so certainly I will try and ski down fairly extensive bits if they're flat, if I can get away with it, if it's not too bumpy. So if it's quite smooth, then you can kind of cross country ski on the skins your way down, which saves a transition. It really depends. It depends on how comfortable you are doing that. And also, if you're with other people, if I'm splitboarding, which often I am with people who've never skied ever in their life before, then that's too much. You know, somebody is not going to be able to do that. So you have to be really mindful of what skills are in the group at that point, and then, you know, save time a different way if you need to save time, or just take a bit longer.
Yeah, and sometimes I've tried to do it in a rush and put my skins on back to front, which is really irritating if you ever do that to yourself. And also I've regularly put the bindings on the wrong skis, so that they're clacking together rather than staying away from each other. My first set of touring poles were one stage collapsible, so they basically kind of collapsed a bit. And what it meant was I could never really get them to fit in my backpack without looking like I had some kind of antenna coming out my back. So unlike skiers who probably got the poles on them most of the time, I found a two-stage collapsible pole much more effective for splitboarding.
I very often keep my poles in pole mode if I know that there's a big flat section, or if I'm going from A to B with skiers, because they will traverse a lot, and it's really difficult to traverse on a snowboard, especially in deep snow. So keeping your poles out at the ready is something that can really help, and you can kind of pole on your snowboard and get away with a lot more. It's definitely worth mentioning, and something to pay attention to when you're riding around the mountain, how to keep altitude on your snowboard. And if you can see, if the visibility is good and you see where you need to go from A to B, and it involves traversing around the mountain, and it looks like quite a direct traverse, a flat line if you like, then it's quite often worth unstrapping, hiking up 30 meters so that you've got more speed and you can make it round the traverse. Easier to do that than end up too low and in the bog or in the bushes or whatever. So thinking ahead a bit when you're traversing around something, especially if you're with skiers, is a good idea.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And on the bigger traverses, you know, I definitely get, like, you know, calf burn if it's on the toe side and need to sort of either stop or, you know, ride a bit in the heel side to even get some blood flow. So a bit of height allows you to make that sort of switchback turn just to get the blood going again, rather than the world's longest toe side traverse that's sometimes required. And even, I don't know if you do this, Leslie, but sometimes I'll ride switch just so I can get the blood flowing back again, just a cheeky wee 180. If I'm not weighed down by an enormous backpack and just fail to actually leave the ground.
Yeah, it's definitely worth practicing that traverse switch. It's a good skill to have when you're getting along.
Yeah. And I've certainly, let's say, for example, you know you're going to be hiking out for a while and then skinning for a bit. Having my snowboard in ski mode with the skins already on it, on the side of my backpack, saves me doing it at whatever, you know, an hour and a half later and it's -2 and windy. I might as well do it, you know, beforehand in the house or what have you, and save myself the time and effort. Yeah, so I mean, you are going up a mountain at the end of the day, and Scottish mountains are, you know, they're not enormous. They're not the Alps or what have you, but there's likely to be portions where there's maybe a river you need to get across, a wee stream, and the poles can come in really handy for stream crossings. There's narrow sections like out at Bidnambian. You have to go up a place with a little bit of a drop each side, which is quite exciting the first time you do it. There, you don't have to go up a ridgeline to go splitboarding. And as Leslie mentioned earlier, you know, it's the winter, so there may be icy sections and the hard and so aka splitboard crampons, or actual crampons, or similar can be very helpful there.
I'm notorious for falling in streams and rivers. always end up falling in. Quite often, if I'm going far afield, certainly if I'm going up to Brerick, I take a pair of trainers or a pair of welly boots and strap them onto my bike, so that I don't have the risk of falling into the river in my snowboard boots, which I have done on a few occasions. I have tried to put bin liners over the top of my snowboard boots and walk through the river. And it did work for the people I was with, but they were a bit taller than me. Unfortunately, one side, the water got above the bin liner and it ended up in a whole world of hurt in -20. So it sucked. Sometimes I take spare socks too, just to make my bag even bigger, even fuller than it is already. So yeah, streams are worth thinking about. They're pretty dangerous, actually, all joking apart, especially in springtime. Be aware of where the burn line is in Scotland. You don't want to fall through the burn line. So just if you're going out of the ski areas, definitely keep that in mind.
Yeah, maybe similar to what you were saying earlier, Leslie, avoid if possible rather than get yourself, you know, if you can look at the map and avoid it, you know, so you don't have to go over it. It's not always possible, but, you know, if you've got the option.
Yeah. Ian's put some links to resources in the chat, just in case you haven't, or somebody's not got the chat open. I think we've mentioned most of them already. There, I'll just sorry, James, I'll just talk through these really quick before we move on. Think Winter. So great resources in that link. The Snow Sport Scotland Think Winter. There's some learning resources in there as well. The Scottish Avalanche Information Service. If you've not heard of that before, then check it out. It's awesome. That's my go-to every morning in the winter. Even if I'm not going up the mountain, because I like to build a picture of what the snow's doing, what the weather's doing over time, so that I've got a really good awareness of what's going on in the snowpack. So obviously the snowpack's always changing. And if you get interested in snow science, it can become, yeah, very, very fascinating. So keeping a tab on what's happening each day. The blog's great. You get pictures of what's happening from the people who make the reports, what they've seen. The Be Avalanche Aware, more great resources to also help you make decisions, but also help you learn about the risks and how to handle them. The Snow Sport Scotland online video, there's some great videos on there from the last few years. And certainly Andy Townsend's done some great avalanche awareness talks. There's some great stuff on there, definitely worth checking out those videos if you haven't done so already. And finally, the Snow Sport Scotland Snow Smart Snow Safety Online e-learning. So this is a self-assessment tool, so it assesses your answers as you go, so you learn and answer. It's interactive, it's really great information. You obviously get to go back and redo your questions if there's something you really don't know originally and you're just learning about, so that you can be sure when you move on, you do know about it. So check out Snow Smart. Probably best to check out the previous resources first if you've not seen them before, and Snow Smart will take you on to the next stage. Yeah, back to you, James.
Awesome. Cheers, Leslie. I'm pressing the button. There we go. Riding. What we all came here for. What a fantastic photo that is. If only
That's
every
also-
day was like that.
It's also above Loch Neil, same day. I think one thing to say about riding, I'll tell you a funny story. So we'd been filming, it was when I was riding for Roxy, and we'd been making a film all season, and we'd been to all sorts of glamorous places, from Revelstoke to Kicking Horse to Jackson Hole, Chamonix and Anton, had powder all season, filming with loads of different filmers and dropping big cliffs and bombing down couloirs. And it was April, and we came back to Scotland and it snowed, and I was really excited. I had a couple of my European friends with me and a filmer, and took a mountain guide with us, and off we went up Brewery. This is going back, 20 odd years. And it looked amazing. It looked really good. It looked like this. The snow looked like this. But I hadn't ridden in Scotland for quite a number of years. And I'd kind of forgotten that in Scotland, especially, it can look like that, like it's powder, and it can be absolutely bulletproof. So, of course, we were used to riding steep couloirs and powder. We picked the steepest, gnarliest lines we could find. It being relatively soft on the ridge, it looked like it was going to be soft, and we dropped in at least 45 miles an hour on probably 40 degrees. And did the biggest, scariest power slide I've ever done in my life, and very quickly remembered, you don't do that in Scotland. So riding skills in Scotland are different. You need to take it easy. You need to, I've always got the voice of my gran in my head, caw canny, because it can change really fast. It can go from powder to bottle ice when you least expect it, even if you're somewhere where it shouldn't be bottle ice, according to the weather forecast and what's been happening in the snowpack. So yeah, definitely worth, especially if you've ridden a bit abroad, North America or Europe, worth remembering that Scotland is really variable. Don't know if you've got a similar experience, James.
I'm trying to think specifically. I think I've turned back from several routes when they turned out to be essentially bulletproof. So I remember going out to Splitboarding and Lochin, and it was clagged in. You couldn't see. It was one of those clouds that's just it stops at like 800 meters, and I heard this scraping noise, and I thought, what is that? And about 5 minutes later, some skiers power side slipped down Broad Gully, and I had originally intended to ride Broad Gully, and I thought that ain't happening. And equally, I stood at the top of that mountain, and a bunch of skiers went down it, and they've done a video of this. And I shouted down to them, how icy is it? And they're like, yeah, it's pretty icy. And if a skier's telling you it's pretty icy, on a snowboard that maybe it's not your day, or at least that's what I decided in that particular moment. But I think the scariest one was actually over at Cairngorm Mountain. That wall over on the right-hand side it's almost like a catcher's mitt. And it's just like what you said. It looked like powder and just was not powder. Just a scream with a power slide. Just hold on. Wait till it gets better.
I think that's one thing to be aware if you're going touring with skiers, especially good skiers, if they don't mind steep icy slopes. It's way easier to negotiate a narrow steep icy slope on skis than it is on a snowboard. So just speak up. Quite often, Finlay Mickle's one of my riding buddies. He's always on his skis. Obviously, he's a World Cup ex-World Cup alpine ski racer. So quite often I'll say, I'm just going round, and I'll go on the slightly more mellow routes, and he'll go down the really steep icy routes. There's absolutely no shame in knowing where your limit is and keeping it fun. So I think we've got a question in the chat.
Yeah, so do you want to
just read in here? I'll read out. Maybe a question for later, but would be good to know some of the more uniquely Scottish aspects of touring that maybe all the international resources wouldn't mention. The one that sticks to mind, James has already talked about it, is the skin sticking to your head So if you go on the how-to videos on YouTube on Black Diamond or whatever, G3,
Yeah.
they'll show you how to put your skins on, and they'll make it look all really neat and tidy and ordered. And I don't think I've ever had that opportunity in Scotland. Everything's flying about, and you get skin stuck everywhere, and your glove blows away, and your ski tries to take off, and your bag fills up with snow because you've left it open. And so just managing your equipment is really worth putting some thought into. And it depends on your bag, how your bag opens. It's really useful to have a bag that opens from the back. And then you can kind of open it a little bit and dig things in and out. If you have to open your bag from the top, you end up in a real mess. Just things like thinking things through, where you're going to put things in your bag will make a big difference. And if you're in the Alps, it's not so much of a big deal because you're usually not out in a howling gale. Spare goggles, making sure you have spare eyewear, at least a pair of glasses, sunglasses, and a pair of goggles, because things get wet in Scotland, and if it's wet and then it refreezes, that's your day really ruined. It's difficult, and especially if the weather then comes in, it's going to make it really difficult to keep going. Spare gloves, okay, take usually a couple of pairs of spare gloves, making it sound all doom and gloom. It's really not. all of this is completely worth it. It's just more, I would say, the mundane things rather than the really technical things you need to think about.
Mm-hmm. Certainly some of the more challenging days have been, the snow's great, I just can't see. What I call pea soup territory. And then I've had to retreat down to, say, an altitude where the cloud is not quite so thick, and I can then actually ride, because while maybe if you're a mountaineer, you embrace the challenge and you want to get in the summit and you're plodding along. If you're snowboarding, you are aiming to be moving relatively fast and you're balancing on one edge. You do need to see where you're going in the backcountry, and obviously things change and you can plan for it to be good and it's not, but certainly I have turned back when I couldn't see anything. I see there's some questions in the chat. I'm just going to pop to the next slide and we'll sit on that maybe while we answer the next question. Talking of gloves, any top tips for glove selection? Certainly from my experience, the key thing in Scotland is waterproof. I've got a pair of really nice Hestra gloves. They're mitts. They're very, very warm, but they're not waterproof at all. They're like flipping sponges. It doesn't matter what waterproofing I put on them, they've never been waterproof. So I think while I've never come across a pair of properly waterproof gloves, there's certainly ones that are more waterproof than others.
I like a mitt as well. Like climbing over mitts. So just a waterproof Pertex or Gore-Tex over mitt. It's a really handy thing to have. And having them in the bottom of your bag, you can put them over your glove liners, and even if your main mitts or your main gloves have got wet, then you'll still have relatively warm hands if you've got that wind protection and that waterproof shield. I put them over my big gloves as well. But certainly having a couple of pairs of thin gloves. I literally take 2 pairs of thin gloves and sometimes 2 pairs of thicker gloves, or at least my thicker gloves and my over mitts with me if I'm going on a long day tour, because I really don't like to have cold hands. I like to have all eventualities covered. Having something that you're dexterous enough in to do the changeover, to transition, is really useful. So having you get a really lightweight, almost like Gore-Tex shell material glove these days. Quite a few of the brands do one of those, and that's really useful because you can still do the transition with your gloves on, but they're waterproof enough that they won't get saturated when you do the transition. So yeah, gloves are a hard one. It's hard to find the perfect pair of splitboarding gloves. Also worth remembering not to let your gloves get all sweaty when you're on the hike up, So better to take them off, and either if they've got loops to tie around your wrist, just let them dangle, or stick them on the top of your poles if it's not too windy. But once your gloves are saturated from the inside out, that's no fun either, and they're not going to dry out on the hill. This is yesterday on Cairngorm, for anyone who's wondering what the snow conditions are like, or on the backside of Cairngorm, Corrie Raybert, about halfway down, I guess. You can see there's still rocks around, but the snow's good.
Did you want to take the lead on the riding in the Cairngorms? Any particular highlights that you would point to? And I'll maybe talk about the West Coast side of things a wee bit.
I'm sure. So in terms of Cairngorm Mountain, so touring from the resort, and the resort is going to have a touring pass again this year, which is great. I think off the top of my head, I think it's £14 for 2 uplifts. And once they get the train running, that offers a really good deal, because you can tour obviously from the Ptarmigan at that point. Cairngorm's a great mountain to learn how to tour from. You can go on mini tours and keep well within your comfort zone whilst learning how to use your equipment. And whether that's, you know, just going around the plateau, sticking to pretty much the flat spots, coming all the way around the corries and coming back down the shoulder of Corrie and Lochan, that gives a very accessible tour with no steep descents to scare anybody. As long as you've got visibility, that's a great tour to do, to test out your equipment. It's got enough ups and downs to do the transitions and really get used to the gear. And certainly, you know, somewhere like Corrie Raybert is fairly steep. That wouldn't be an intro into touring kind of day. Obviously too steep to go up it on my skins and on my board and ski mode. I'm hiking there, and I'd always hike up that. If it's later in the season, I'd be cramponing up it. So that's for when you're a bit more used to moving about in the terrain. It's a lovely run though. It's not terrifyingly steep. It's definitely accessible in good conditions, as long as you've checked the avalanche forecast. It has been known to avalanche on occasion. Certainly the Keith Merith and the south side of Cairngorm have some nice accessible terrain. It's just under 30 degrees and really, really lovely when the snow's good. George Reid always posts pictures, lovely pictures from the south side of Cairngorm. So if anybody's been following him on British Backcountry, that's his spot. Yeah, usually you can see on British Backcountry what looks good. Somebody will have posted there. Obviously the Schnechta lines, they're all fairly gnarly and have consequences. So unless it's perfect conditions and not icy at all, you shouldn't really be going in there unless you've been well prepared. I wouldn't recommend it. Perhaps if you'd like to go in there, but you're not quite sure, then that's the time where you'd be wanting to get a guide, or getting one of your friends who knows the area to show you around and show you the ropes. Further round into Corrie and Lochan, then there are not many lines in there that are accessible easily. So yeah, you're definitely talking about starting to use ropes when you get around to that corrie. So not really splitboard touring. Best to stay where you can keep the ropes out of the action, unless you're with a guide. And then heading in the other direction, so more towards the east, of course, you've got the Keist Gullies and the Coyley Moor. Great terrain in there, awesome for learning how to go off piste and tour kind of in the side country of the resort. Highly recommend it. We do have in the Snow Sport Scotland resources that we're going to see at the end, Snow Sport Scotland Side Country Leader course. That's for anybody who's already got one of the instructor courses. If you'd like to work more on your touring and on your riding skills, that's a great course to look at. James is running some and going, cool, I'm running at least one, maybe two over here in Cairngorm. And the Backcountry Essentials courses as well. will give you definitely a taster of Cairngorm and what the backcountry next to and the side country within the resort can offer.
Thanks, Leslie. So I'm based over West Coast direction, and certainly Three Sisters is a pretty well-known photogenic area. A lot of people have probably stopped off in the car park, taken a couple of photos, got a few selfies. But that whole sort of interlocked series of mountains there, I think you call it a massif. It's got all sorts of options. So the challenge in the West Coast is you're near the actual coast. So I live right next to the sea, and so often the first part of your splitboarding session is getting to high enough that there is snow. But certainly if you head out towards Bidgeon, there's a run in Kenny Biggin's book called Paradise. And as you can imagine, it doesn't take a genius to work out what that one can be like. And it's this gorgeous open bowl with a number of, I wouldn't call them chutes, more gullies. So they're not too technical. They're sort of red run territory. And because it's a relatively mellow bowl, the sun gets to it relatively early on. So it's unlikely, although it's Scotland, so it can get icy, it's often in very good condition, and it's not too much of a slog to get into. But then should you want to take it up a notch, there's steeper chutes like rustlers, which give you an extra bit of challenge if you've got things like an ice axe to get up over the cornice, for example. And then Ben Nevis, I'm hoping to get involved with the North Face side of things, but certainly the Redburn route and out over above the halfway lock-in, I've found that really quite, just the fact that I've ridden on Ben Nevis, but it's not been the most gnarly terrain ever, quite satisfying. I do see there's a question come in. I'll just briefly talk about the Eastern Moors will not feature in any guidebook I've ever seen, and are unlikely to do so. And similar to what Leslie was saying with Breirich, if you had an e-bike, you could get yourself really quite far out there and save yourself a huge amount of time and effort in getting quite far out into the Eastern Moors. There is a path all the way out, really, but a lot of it's covered in snow, obviously higher up. And Binnenmore itself is an 1100 meter peak that's roughly a pyramid shape. So I've ridden the southeasterly flank, but I've got on the cards to ride the other two flanks at some point. And so while it might not be your starting point, the area next to it is an enormous open bowl with sort of just endless lines that would be much more mellow, and an entry point right next to an area that gives you some more gnarly options as well. So they would be some highlights for me so far. Somebody's just heading off. Cool, thanks for joining us, Johnny. Just to briefly touch on Carmore Jerrig, so that's directly opposite Ben Nevis, and it's a decent height of peak in and of itself. I think it's around the 1100 meter, 1200 meter territory. So it's the mountain in between Nevis Range, aka Anachmore, and Ben Nevis itself, and it's a fairly sharp ridgeline with a number of bowls along the north facing side, and you can also ride down the south facing side to the CIC hut, directly looking at the north face of Ben Nevis, which is epic. But the terrain there is relatively mellow depending on the conditions, and you could easily pick the south facing aspect of Carmore Jerrig if it looks like it's going to be firm, but if it looks like it'll be soft, you've got the north facing aspect as well, and you can easily link together a few different bowls in one day, and that there's a bit of physicality to it, but definitely worth it. So timing, certainly over in the West Coast at the moment, we've got a lovely dusting of snow, but I would end up with a snowboard that's a few rocks if I took it out right now. So I'll be waiting until the mountains come in a bit more condition before I actually ride them if it's around here. I think you've got out and about already, Leslie. I'm very jealous.
Yeah. So we first went out on Friday and it was marginal. I mean, it was fun, but it was definitely, we're risking our base. Whereas over the weekend it snowed a lot on Cairngorm and higher up, certainly down to about, I'd say, 700 meters. The coverage is really good for this time of year. It's very light snow though, so you go through to the base easily. It's definitely what we'd call sharky, but good, really good. And there's more snow falling today, and there's more snow falling over the weekend with a bit of wind. So definitely worth noting the avalanche number today is considerable. So on Scottish Avalanche Information Service, there is an orange marker for the south and east aspects on Cairngorm. So just be aware if you are planning to head out onto Cairngorm or around the northern Cairngorms over the next few days.
Yeah, and certainly timing the day so that you're likely to hit the window of opportunity when the snow is at its best is an art that takes a while to get the hang of. I've done it wrong both ways round. But at least having a plan of I'm going to try and arrive at say 1 p.m, 2 p.m. or something like that, so that I have the option of trying a run that's relatively easy, maybe what's still quite firm, and then a harder one later on when it softens up. There's a few scenarios into the mix there. And you may need to go up something rather firm in the morning that will soften up by the time you go down it. And that's where those hard shies and or crampons and potentially an ice axe or two will come in handy.
I've just got a question from Nick, who's asking, as an intermediate snowboarder but beginner splitboarder, I'll just read the question. Intimidated by the amount of gear. So am I, all the time, every day. How am I going to get in my bag? And experience needed. Is it best to grab some basic gear, then try a few courses and gain experience? Absolutely. Make, backpack, splitboard, skins, obviously your normal riding stuff, your gloves, your goggles, your buff, etc. Harshizing for your bindings, and give it a shot. The Up Battle Glencoe would be a perfect place to try out splitboarding. James will be there, I'll be there. I think I'm running some little mini workshops there. There's lots of gear there to try, test out. And yeah, people will point you in the right direction. If you already have gear or want to rent it, then those backcountry essentials workshops, one-day workshops in Cairngorm are another easy and accessible way to try out touring. And you don't have to start with the long 6 to 8 hour missions into the back of beyond. That's for when you feel confident and comfortable with all the gear you've got, and your level is ready. So start where you're ready and work up. Up battles also, there's an up battle in Cairngorm as well. There'll be lots of equipment testing there. So Glencoe, 10th and 11th of February, is that right, James? I got that right?
Sounds about right. I think the key thing with the Glencoe one is take it as a splitboarding event rather than a racing event. So it's much more about getting into the sport and trying it as opposed to racing others. And then
I'll also be at the Mighty Co doing splitboard workshops, half-day workshops at the Mighty Co, some avalanche awareness and some skills. So the Mighty Co is, James, hit me with the dates, weekend before Cairngorm Up Battle.
Yeah, it's off the top of my head, it's the second weekend of March. So I think that's something like 10th and 11th again. I don't have a calendar up in front of me, but it's the second weekend in March.
And some other good opportunity for trying new gear or trying
Mm.
gear if you've not yet tried splitboarding.
Yeah. And if you are looking to rent a split board for any event, so for example, the Mighty Cole, the Sick and Wrong down in England do rent split boards, so it's definitely worth getting in touch with them.
Snowboard Asylum also have rentals in Aviemore now too.
Cool, yeah.
It's good to know.
So certainly, from my experience of split boarding, you know, like the photo you see there is again out in the Eastern Moors, in the Western Scottish Highlands. I've it's my day off. You know, I'm getting up early, even though I'd rather have a lie-in, because I want to be there before it gets into sort of blancmange territory. In spring this year, I went and did rustlers out over Pigeon direction, and it was so slushy, it was unreal. So it was springtime and it was warm, and it's really easy to ride slushy conditions, but getting up the actual mountain itself when the slush is about a foot deep is really tricky. So just having a bit of an idea of, is it a cold day, is it a warm day, when's it likely to get above freezing by looking at the forecast. And you won't get it right, or at least I struggle to get it right, but having at least a plan of this is when it's likely to be in good condition, and maybe having a break in a snack bar while you're waiting for it to warm up or something can be a clever option. So how? Certainly, if you've never been to an area before, I would suggest, if you've got a few options of what route to take down, take the nice chill option down, just get a feel for it. Somewhere with good visibility, there's no crazy rollovers where you're not really sure what's on the other side. You know, don't build in a 20-foot jump into your first ride down something. And then maybe you can come back a week later or something, and you've, you know, in your first recce, you spied, oh, I'd like to do that for next time, and you gradually sort of hop your way around the bowl of an area.
Just keep in mind also, if you've been out and about in the backcountry or the side country before, it will likely look different from year to year, month to month, and even day to day. So depending on what direction the wind's been coming, how the snow's blown in, the wind features can look really different. So not only for riding down, to be aware that, you know, it might ride differently than the last time you were there, but for navigation, because you might not actually recognize where you are. And there's been quite a few times when it's been a bit bad visibility, and due to the way the snow's come in, it's looked so different that I've been somewhere where that's actually really familiar, but I've felt momentarily very disorientated and lost until I worked out what was going on.
Yeah, and certainly I've gone out and, you know, it's very tempting to all ride down at the same time, but it's far more practical to ride one at a time, and that way if something goes wrong, somebody's not miles below you and has to hike back up, you can also have them video you from the summit as you ride down and things like that. And also, I mean, my experience in the Highlands is signal can be really patchy, and I would love in the future to get some two-way radios. But if I could communicate back up to somebody that a particular route was either good or bad, that would certainly be very useful information to have as the second rider. And that can be just you have somebody ride 100 yards and shout back at you, "It's icy," or "It's great, go for it," or whatever it might be. And if worse comes to worse, and you do get avalanched, you've got somebody looking out for you where you're likely to be, and will do their best to then come and rescue you. And then, you know, I once weighed myself in with all my touring gear in my backpack, and don't feel like you have to, you know, I weighed 20 kilograms extra of gear. So that's the split board, the bindings, the boots, the backpack, you know, the water bottle, the lunch, etc. It's not like, oh, James is saying you need to carry a 20-kilogram backpack or you shouldn't even bother. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm getting at is that you have, compared to regular snowboarding, you've got a heavy backpack, and certainly I've ended up parked on the hillside much longer than I planned to. And so what I try to think of when I'm riding is do a nice solid toe side turn, but try not to get locked in on a sort of park and ride hillside that, you know, I'll never get out of again. Especially in steeper terrain, because you can see better on the hillside. It's really tempting to park on the hillside, but my body doesn't bend as well on the hillside as the toes. I can take a lump or a bump or steeper terrain at much more of an angle on the toes than the heels. And as you can see, certainly I'm in a very open stance in the lower photo. I'll end up much more than open than that at particular times. And that goes with the more forward binding angles. And, you know, I've done a lot of instructor courses and things, and I've got decent technique, but I'm not above getting the shoulders into the mix if I need to. And especially in deeper snow, I'm going to need to have all of my body helping me get around if it's really stodgy. So no need to have the arms lined up with the board, a la old school snowboarding. A particular instructor system taught me that way to begin with, put it that way. Any thoughts on that sort of side of things, Leslie?
I mean, you have to be really flexible in terms of being able to vary your technique, and it's all about being able to be softer or more hard on the pressure when you need to be. And so then, you know, the more adaptable you can be in the way you're standing, the better you're going to cope. Especially in Scotland, because, you know, it changes all the time. It's variable snow. So any sort of static riding position is not going to help you out nice and relaxed, nice and flowing. Certainly just the backpack, you know, I'm not a big person, but I got a big backpack. It's worth getting yourself strong, make sure your core's strong, make sure you're ready physically to go touring if you're planning long tours. If you're only going for a couple of hours, it's not such a big deal. But if you're planning to go for day-long tours, don't underestimate the physicality of just carrying the backpack. It's a lot to take on. Make sure you do some yoga, do some stretching afterwards, drink lots of water. Big believer in looking after your body if you're going to be out on the hill all day. In terms of stance, you know, I'm riding right up 27 angles on my front foot these days. With I've gone even positive. I'm controversial on my back foot. I've got +3 on my back foot at the moment, which is awesome. On the board I'm riding, I'm riding a pretty specific carvy split board. It works really well with a narrower stance with bigger angles. Play about with your stance. Don't be set on your same stance. Experiment. Different boards ride better with different stances. I encourage you, not just on your split boards, but on your normal snowboards, to have an experiment and see what you like. And I'll ride everything from, you know, 15-15 to 27 +3. So there's very different stances depending on what I'm doing and what board I'm riding.
Mm-hmm. And then you can see just in the photo below was spring this year. So, you know, March, April, I think it was April 2022. And you can see there's some rocks around, and you're constantly having to sort of look where you're going. And, you know, certainly when I'm coaching snowboarding, a lot of people tend to look at their board. And of course, it's I'm essentially stating the obvious, but it's worth mentioning that looking where you're going and looking not just 10 feet ahead, but 20 feet ahead or whatever, and doing a bit of route planning for yourself. And I think, you know, the photo above for Leslie there's a few snow sharks about, and I'm sure you were looking ahead and planning your route there as well. It's definitely going to pay dividends, as opposed to, oh, there's a cliff, oh crap.
Helmets are for me, helmets are essential when you're splitboarding and touring in Scotland, because there's so many rocks around, and sometimes you just don't have the time to avoid a rock. And if you stop dead on a rock, then the first thing that's going to hit the ground is likely your shoulders or your head. So you don't want to take a rock on the head. And yeah, certainly encourage everyone to wear a helmet in the backcountry.
Definitely. So just signposting a wee bit to what we were talking about earlier on the safety front, talking about the helmets and things. And I bought a new helmet this year because the one I've got is about, I don't know, 7 years old or something. So about time I got a new one. And here we have your Snow Sports Scotland website, and you can see the red circle there. So click on resources, online training videos, and I went to most of them and they were absolutely fantastic. And if you're looking for a bit more detail on analyzing snowpack and getting out and about in the backcountry, they are a fantastic resource to have as part of what's available through the national governing body. Ian, if you want to say anything at any point, feel free to just jump in, mate.
Just click one more time there, James. It'll pop up a little window over the top. If you scroll down, well, you can't scroll down, but that's what you would get if you were to scroll down that very page. On the left-hand side, obviously the off-piste and backcountry videos, there's a whole list of them there. And then there's obviously Alpine Coach, Snow Sports Scotland membership stuff and Nordic stuff in there as well. But left-hand column, once you're on that Snow Sports Scotland site, yeah, there's a ruck of stuff in there worth a look, and more to come. There's some excellent ones on group decision-making in the backcountry to come with a fantastic guy called Phil Ebert, who's a professor at Stirling and I believe also Dundee University, who talks about the interesting aspects of having a group of people out on the hill and how that influences your decision making. We'll be uploading that one shortly, so keep your eye on those online videos, educational videos. They keep being added to regularly.
Thanks, Ian. And there's also the actual physical training courses themselves that both Leslie, myself, and I would imagine Glenmore Lodge and others will be running. From the backcountry pathway, so side country leader and upwards, as well as regular instructor courses for those looking to coach others in snowboarding, skiing, and so forth. And you can look at the calendar there to get the dates of both the training and assessments. And look at that, there's a backcountry training webinar, everything splitboarding. Maybe we should go to that.
And the one day backcountry essentials courses on avalanche awareness and avoidance courses, the dates will be out very soon in the next few days. Just looking to confirm with Cairngorm when they're going to open and when the touring pass will be live. So they will be posted on here on the Snow Sports Scotland calendar and also on Wandering Workshops website.
Do you want to talk about Think Winter in particular, Ian?
Joint collaboration with Mountaineering Scotland. Again, just a ruck of resources. It's a much broader view, if you like, on looking at snow safety and mountain safety in the winter, but some really excellent resources in there. Been running for quite a few seasons now, but if you can't get to it through the link on Snow Sports Scotland, then by all means just go straight to Mountaineering Scotland and you'll get the information from Think Winter. But again, a plethora of resources in there that are all very useful.
Thanks, Ian. And we've mentioned it before, but it's worth mentioning again. Scottish Avalanche Information Service is fantastic, and you can see a sort of a screen grab there of what it can look like, and you can kind of see just here the description, weekly snowpack summary, and it really is about the description that's maybe just slightly obscured there. The avalanche rows can be a good way of just visualizing, but it's about visualizing the description itself. I think a lot of people would say the devil is in the detail, And while the avalanche rose is very useful visualization, do definitely read the actual descriptions of the snowpack in the area you're likely to be riding in. And from my own personal experience, I read it throughout the winter, regardless of whether I plan to be riding there next week, just to kind of keep tabs on it. And then Be Avalanche Aware is an app that you can get on your phone. It's a fantastic app, and I think maybe it's not translated particularly well just there, but you get the general idea. These are resources available to you to make sure you avoid getting avalanched, essentially.
The Avalanche Aware app will link to your location as well and provide you the avalanche forecast. It's quite a handy app to have. Of course, we haven't mentioned avalanche safety equipment, which is a whole subject and skill in itself. So shovel, transceiver, probe, those are all essential bits of equipment if you are going out of bounds. We don't have time to go into those bits of equipment today, so definitely something to get a bit of training in.
For sure, and certainly the transceiver should be on from the moment you've got it out, rather than when you think you've got into avalanche terrain. You bung it on at the start of the day, turn it on, and check it with your buddies' transceiver to make sure they're both transmitting and receiving. And also the batteries. No point in having a transceiver with 10% battery left. That's just that. We
will be running transceiver lessons, if you like. I don't want to call it training because it's some people might not have done it before. Transceiver sessions at the Up Battle events and at the Mighty Co, and at all the avalanche avoidance and awareness workshops, and also touch on it in the Backcountry Essentials.
And then Snowspark. So this, you may or may not be aware of it, but level 3 launched just about maybe 10 days ago, and it's great to go through that and improve your knowledge and awareness of the hazards and information gathering processes and so forth when you're getting yourself into the side country. And you can work your way through from level 1 to 3, with 4 being on the cards in the not too distant future. And it also gives you a score and a percentage. And I had my first go at the level 3 one about 10 days ago, just after it launched, and amazingly enough managed to pass it without any open books required. I was quite pleased with that. So there's some specific training events for you with some particular dates, and hopefully the weather cooperates for us to be able to run them. And just want to say thank you very much for coming, and open the floor to questions, comments, suggestions, etc.
Yeah, I'm completely new. Don't know anything about it. How does it hold together, the actual parts of the board?
Yeah, it's another very good question. There are different mechanisms for the different brands. Some of the older brands, the mechanism is a bit loose. So what happens is the two halves of the split board can bend a little bit. And on an older split board, you're better with a very solid binding base. And the bindings usually slip onto two pucks. There's like pucks or connection plates on each ski, if you like, and the binding is a solid plate, and that slips on, and that will give torsional stiffness to the board to stop it doing that in the middle. The newer boards have better clips, so are more torsionally stable on their own without needing the bindings to support them. So the interface between the board and bindings is important to investigate, especially if you're buying secondhand. And always, you can always reach out to James or myself If you want advice, we're happy to answer questions about specific brands and how they work together, boards and bindings. Help?
Thank you.
Welcome.
They also have a tail and a nose clip that usually levers, and usually some kind of mid clip that cinches together, like either I'm trying to do this in vertical like that, or some other variation. The Karakoram ones have changed lately, for example, but they all have slightly different ways of operating.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can fire in with some bindings. So bindings, again, personal choice, look around. The different brands work quite differently. So James has mentioned Karakoram. There's a brand called Sparks. There's a brand called Union. Salomon make their own. K2 make their own. Nitro make their own. There's quite a few specific snowboard companies. Volley, obviously, one of the first split board companies. It's worth looking around. Either the Sick and the Wrong or Snowboard Asylum, I would say, are your best options. There's so much online as well. Have a look around at the equipment and how it works. If you've got little feet, then yeah, definitely make sure you buy or get hold of things that fit your boots, because that can be a problem.
Yeah, I'll second that. I bought a pair of medium-sized split board bindings as part of a package. But I have small size feet, and what I found is what I would call contouring. So you're split boarding on a sort of, say, 45-degree angle. So my foot was turning inside the binding, and I've had my right ankle reconstructed, and that was a real strain on my ankle, having to tense that ankle up to stabilize versus the binding not fitting. So I invested in some small bindings, because that's, so check the you know, like any snowboard binding that will have a shoe size range, you know, check that they are the correct shoe size range, is you wouldn't want it too big or too small. And if anyone's got dinky feet, then that's very helpful.
If you're looking for a pair of bindings that switches easily from split boards onto your regular snowboard, Union do a really good option, where you would just have one binding and two different sets of plates, and you can switch from your split board to your normal snowboard. There's definitely a playoff there. Sparks tend to be known to be very user-friendly, and I think the new Karakorams, I've not tried them, but they seem to be fairly user-friendly as well. Marginal.
Yeah, yeah. The old Karakorams were way better in my humble opinion. So they've lost the heel lockdown functionality for skiing on flat terrain, and they are a lot more faffy. The Spark R&D ones that I previously had were by far and away much easier to use, in my opinion, and much more friendly to a little bit of slush or whatever in the binding. And what I did is I just took a cotton bud and a bit of liquid silicone and put it around where the ice tends to accumulate, so it's water repellent. It stops it sticking on, off, nice and easy. And so yeah, literally a tip. So, you know, if I was next time I buy bindings, I think they will probably be Spark R&D, but they're not cheap, so I'm sticking with them for now.
We've got a couple of questions in the chat.
Yeah,
So are there many wide split boards? I've seen Karoo have some wider models, and the Jones Hovercraft seems pretty wide. There are a number of wide models of split boards out there. I think K2 might do one also. Worth just checking the specs. Check the specs on the websites and in the magazines, in the snowboard test editions of the magazines. There's certainly options out there. Found the Spark R&D base plates to be uncomfortable underfoot. I have heard that before. Is it your boots or is it the binding? So if you have quite a rigid sole on your snowboard boot, that'll help. Perhaps a footbed in your snowboard boot might help as well, if you don't already have a footbed in your snowboard boot. Otherwise, you could put some rubber pads on your actual base plates. That's also an option, or this a bit of stomp pad might work. But you know, you're going to have to play about there. I'd check the footbeds first. That would be the easiest fix.
And if just to go back briefly to the wider snowboard question, I believe that hard shies are available in different widths. So if you're buying a wider board, just make sure it's compatible with, if you are getting split board crampons, that they're the width for the board that you're buying.
Michael's come in to say that you get padding for the spark binding, so that's good to know. Sick in the wrong, have that. The white line's 100, obviously always good for gear. We mentioned one-day avalanche courses that will be held at Cairngorm. Are there any planned for the West Coast at all? So certainly the Mighty Co and the Up Battle will have mini courses. So half a day, couple of hours to half a day events on. James, do you plan to do any one-day avalanche awareness courses? I think Glenmore Lodge might have a couple.
Yeah, so I was talking to the event organizers, Hillside Outside, yesterday, and we're just firming everything up. Certainly last year, we did some avalanche awareness sessions with Ski Patrol at Glencoe Mountain. And what specifically we're doing this year, I don't think we've quite nailed it down to that level of detail. We will be doing intro to off-piste sessions and some entry-level splitboarding stuff aimed at those who maybe splitboarded once before and want to just get stuck into it with a little bit of coaching into the bargain rather than just here's the gear and off you go. And they were great, you know, great fun to coach last year. That's for sure. I got a kick out of it, and Glencoe's got some really decent terrain, so you can get your split board on and try some easy runs, and then if you want to get gnarly, we've got some gnarly terrain, you know. Not sure what Nevis Range are doing. Certainly one of the better days I've ridden in Scotland was the Nevis Range back quarries, and I really would like to get back out into there this winter if possible. I don't know if anyone knows specifically what Nevis Range will be doing.
Do you know if Nevis Range are having a winter opener event this year?
No, I don't think so.
Because it's snowing just now, worth keeping your ears to the ground, because little events might pop up. And certainly if it continues to snow and it's possible and there's a need, I can certainly come west and run a couple of avalanche awareness and avoidance courses if there is the need and the desire for those. So certainly drop Ian at Snow Sports Scotland an email if you are west and you would really like to do either a backcountry essentials or avalanche awareness and avoidance course, and we can see if there's enough takers, if there's enough want.
Awesome. Well,